this video, we're going to set up an installation of 2019 Exchange server on a 2019 core server. And again, the benefit of that, it utilizes less system resources and it's a smaller attack surface. And I guess you could argue that, all the management for Exchange 2019 can be done via the EAC and the ECP and remotely anyway, like using things like RSAT tools and Windows Admin Server. So we're going to sign into our freshly installed 2019 core server, and okay, and probably the first thing I want to do is go ahead and give this a static IP and modify the host name. And so to do that, we'll just use sconfig, and in sconfig, I'm going to choose option 2 for the computer name. And I'm going to call this mail 2019 core 01. And count, you can go over 15 characters, but when you are setting a host name, I would keep it to 15 characters or less. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. If you go over 15, I've noticed there's issues sometimes accessing things in Windows Admin Center and also in Server Manager, just because it needs that, sort of that pre-Windows 2000 compatibility. So it's up to you, but I'd keep my host name under 15 characters. Do I want to restart now? No, not yet. All right, so that was the computer name. And let's go ahead and configure our network settings. We're going to set a static IP. You guys want a static IP for a server. Anything like a domain controller or a file server or Exchange, definitely a static IP. You don't want DHCP addresses, being lost or falling out of scope or being released and renewed. And matter of fact, a lot of Microsoft server products won't even let you actually install things unless you have a static IP of it. Okay, so to configure a static IP, we are in network settings, and under network adapter settings, I want to choose option 1 to set the network adapter address, and I'm going to choose S for static, and I want to choose 192.168.70. And that's just sort of the formatting of the way my network's set up with the router and the gateway and all that. And I'm going to give this an IP address of 50 because my domain controller is like 25 and 26. So 192.168.70.50. Okay. And I'm going to go with the default subnet mask, which is 3 octets. So just hit enter and accept the default. It's a class C, right? 24 bits, 3 octets. Enter the default gateway. Now my default gateway is 192.168.70.2. Okay, in this instance. Okay, so that's my default gateway. Now I need to change my DNS server settings. I'm gonna set this to be the DNS, the static IP address of my domain controller. In this case, the one that's acting as my Active Directory integrated DNS server. So that is 192.168.70.25. Okay, and then in this case, I would normally set a secondary and a tertiary, but not going to do that right now. In this example, we're just going to use one DNS address. Okay, so with those settings modified, I want to go ahead and restart things here. So I'm going to choose option 13, restart the server. And I'm not sure I want to restart. I'll say yes. Okay, and I'm going to sign back in. Give us a little margin space here, and just gonna check my IP settings. Okay, so 192.168.70.50, Class C subnet looks good. My gateway looks good, 70.2, and my DNS 192.168.70.25 looks good. And I just maybe test things out with a ping. So, you know, first we'll try up to layer 3 of the OSI, so 192.168.70.25. That looks good. Now let's see if we can ping it by hostname. Okay, good, and that's IP version 6. And if I specify IP version 4 in my ping, then in my echo reply, you know, what gets returned, 192.168.70.25. All right, so we've checked for connectivity and things look good there. What about my computer name? Good. So my host name is now mail 2019 core-01. And this is backwards compatible because it's, you know, it's 15 characters. It's not, you don't want to ever really want a host name more than 15 characters because you can have issues with like Windows Admin Center and ask me how I know. But okay, so the next thing we want to do, you know, we're going to join the domain and eventually we're going to set up Exchange on this core server. But you know, one of the things that's vital, you know, sort of to the heartbeat of Active Directory is all of your servers and your domain controllers and your workstations need to be configured with accurate timing and in the same time zone. So I'm going to type PowerShell to go into PowerShell. And inside PowerShell, I can use a couple of commands. I'm going to get time zone. Okay, so I'm on Eastern Standard Time. So that's cool. If I wasn't, because I'm in Florida, I'm on the East Coast here, so I'd want to use Set-TimeZone and Eastern Standard Time. Okay. Oop. I've left it in there. There. Okay. Not Eastern Standard Time. Eastern Standard Time. No. Eastern Standard Time. Yeah. All right. So that's just how you would set your time zone. But that's pretty important. You want to you know, you want to make sure that everything in Active Directory is synchronized and the timing's proper. That's just something vital for replication. And Exchange 2019, it needs to communicate accurately and rapidly with domain controllers for all kinds of things. You know, for user accounts and mailbox information and attribute data and all that stuff's replicating around, and there has to be a timestamp and a serial number that gets set up on all that information. So, you know, timing is very important, right? So we wouldn't want to have domain controllers in one time zone and then our core Exchange 2019 servers configured in a different time zone, or even our management workstations in a different time zone, because that would create problems and issues. Another thing I'm going to do, because it might be more secure to leave this set to a smaller increment of time later on, but for now, during the setup process, when I'm going to kind of be walking around and going back and forth between things, I want to increase the amount of time that my core server can be idle before it automatically logs me out. And I can do that powercfg change monitor timeout AC0. And I'll do that for DC, and I'm going to change my disk timeout AC, disk timeout DC. And those are for the two management plans that you would see in control panel, but we don't have that. This is core, right? So these are all like, command line tools and PowerShell. It's kind of what we're left with on a core server, but we're just doing essentially the same thing as if you opened the control panel and went into, your power configuration plan and you were changing the timeouts. And this is not necessary, but it just kind of makes it more convenient during the setup process if you avoid those timeout procedures. That was disks. I'm gonna do standby timeout AC and DC, and that's really all I have to worry about. There's hibernate too, but we don't have to worry about that on a core server. All right, so that just not necessary, but it's a matter of convenience. But the next important step before we install Exchange 2019, and we've got a long ways to go, still. So let's go ahead and join our computer to the domain. And to do that, since we're in PowerShell, we can simply use the command add computer and domain name. Not case sensitive, but it just bothers me. So BattleStars.fleet. Yeah, I know it's a test environment, so hey, I can name it what I want. So BattleStars.fleet, and we'll add the restart option there. We'll go ahead and just restart it. All right, so I need a domain admin account in my domain that has permission to actually add a workstation or a member server to the domain. In this case, it's Starbuck, right? Because, hey, of course she would be a domain admin, right? If you're a BSG fan. So, super secret password, and I click OK. And we are on our way to adding our pristine new core server with its new static IP and its new host name to our domain and joining it to Active Directory. Okay, and now it's been added, rebooting. Sign back in here, and just so you know, you don't have to do that in PowerShell. You can do that with sconfig too, right? So there are options here. If I wanted to join a domain or leave a domain, I could choose option 1. But notice that I'm BattleStars.fleet, so I've successfully joined that domain. Notice that there's my name change and my network settings and all are intact. All that stuff, all that good stuff is there. Now, one of the next things we want to do is enable, remote PowerShell access on our core server. Again, remember the whole idea behind a core server is that it's managed remotely. Remote PowerShell, Windows Admin Center, RSAT tools, Server Manager, all those tools out there that are available on either, say, a 2019 member server or a Windows 10 workstation that can be installed and configured to manage a core server remotely. So in the core server setup process, we want to enable that functionality. Standard procedure. So let's go into PowerShell, and to enable remote PowerShell access, there's a couple of options. We could go enable PSRemoting and SkipNetworkProfileCheck and use the first option. Okay, and so we've enabled it. Another option that would pretty much do the exact same thing, but maybe it's a bit shorter. You could type WinRM, and then in this case, quickconfig. All right, so, all right, and in this case, since we did it before with Enable-PSRemoting, you know, WinRM service is already running on this machine. Let's see, what else? What are some of the preliminaries we should take care of? Let's go ahead and enable ping on this machine. And there's a couple of ways to do that. So we can do netsh firewall set ICMP setting 8. And that enables it successfully. You can also do that if you use the sconfig tool. All right. And if I do to, I believe it's configure remote management. Yeah, here you go. Option 3, configure server response to ping, right? And that's less secure. It's something you'd want to turn off after the setup process. But while you're setting up and creating your Exchange servers and connecting them to AD and testing everything and just building your mailbox environment, it could be a very useful tool. And so that's just another option there. And I'll exit the sconfig tool. Okay. And okay. And let's see, out of PowerShell and back in PowerShell. Another thing that you would want to do, I'll exit real quick, is make sure that you activate your Windows client. And so I can check that with slmgr and then xpr. And then this machine is permanently activated. I've already activated it, but if I needed to activate it, then I could do slmgr.vbs --ato. Or what's easier is right within here, you have the option, option 11. And you have all these tools here for installing a product key, activating Windows, displaying license info, and so forth. Okay, so that's another thing. You want to make sure that your core server has been activated. That's just one less thing to worry about, right? Next thing we want to do is enable remote desktop. And there are a couple of ways to do that. All right, so from the command prompt, I could type C script and then C, and this is built into Windows System 32, and then SC regedit WSF AR 0. All right, so with that registry setting, it enables remote management. But again, I'm trying to show you several ways of doing these things, but I need to see there, sconfig. But you can also do it from sconfig, right? So if I wanted to go into configure remote management, and I can say enable remote management, okay, and it's enabled. And also remote desktop, right? It's enabled for all clients, but I just want to show you the setting. If I choose option 7, so enable or disable, and if I choose enable, notice my options, more secure and less secure. I'd set it to more secure eventually, or I may disable remote desktop entirely. I might not need it, but for now, to make things easy on the, easy for our setup process, I'll just allow simpler connections. Okay, so now the next thing we want to do is we're going to need to add some folks in to both the local administrators group, and also to the remote desktop users group. All right, so there's a couple of commands that we can use in PowerShell. Oh, if I spell it right. PowerShell. All right, so we can call get local group, and this gives us a listing of our typical built-in local groups, right? And I can call get local group member, and the first thing we'll look at is the local administrators group. Okay, so all right, so there's Carly Salali. These are just domain admins. These are just the built-in groups, nobody special. But let's say that we wanted to add Starbuck. All right, so there's a command add local group member, and then I want to specify the local group name, administrators, and then I want to specify the member, and in this case, Starbucks a domain admin account, right? So it's Active Directory, it's not a local account. So in this case, I'm going to say BattleStars, and then a backslash, and Starbuck, okay? So I'll add her into the local administrators group. And if we call get local group member administrators, look, there she is, okay? So that's just, again, if I sign into my core server and I'm doing administrative tasks, if I give myself local administrative access, that just simplifies. Look, on all these steps, take it with a grain of salt, because there's always that eternal competition, convenience versus security. It's convenient when you're setting things up and you're configuring an environment from scratch to open privileges up and to give yourself local administrative access, and it just saves you time when you're going in and doing things that require those privileges, and you don't have to worry about forgetting that you don't have them and then going back later and adding them. But you could argue against that, and you could say, oh, Carly, that's a bad idea. That's really not secure. That's really insecure. You need to follow least privilege. And I would say that you're right. I need to follow least privilege. But, you have that eternal warfare going on between convenience versus security. The more secure you make everything, the less convenient. And the more convenient, a lot of times, the less secure. But my philosophy, when I'm setting things up, I kind of like to open things up until I get done with the setup process and then go in and lock it down. But, maybe that's foolhardy. A lot of you guys would probably say, hey, start with everything locked down and just open up one little piece of the pie at a time as it's required, as it's needed. Tangent, scroll. But, that covers that subject. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at, that was the administrators group, but there's also the remote desktop users. And you could argue, well, Carly, it's a core server. You don't really need RDP access on a core server. You just remote PowerShell it. You can Windows admin center it. True, but I'm gonna, I've chosen to enable it. And the thing is, if I get the membership of that group, and get local group member group, remote desktop users, put a space there. There's nobody in that group by default, right? We're going to add some folks in that group. Yeah. So, first thing I might want to do, add local group member, and I'm going to say remote desktop users. Just hit the up arrow. But okay, I'm going to add Starbuck into that group. All right. So now there she is, and she has remote access. And, I might want to add all my domain admins in. You never know. Whole group I might want to add in. Or I might want to add some other folks in. Who knows? But, so... All right. So in this case, now I just added all the domain admins, of which Starbuck is a member, but I also explicitly added her, just to kind of give you an example. All right, so those two groups, sort of important. Local administrators group, and the remote desktop users group. We're all set up for remote PowerShell now. We're all set up for RDP, remote access, on the core server side. And then we'll be ready to set things up on the management workstation side later. Next thing we want to do is install some prerequisites for Exchange 2019. So let me clear this here, and I'm going to use the command, PowerShell commandlet get Windows feature. Oh, if I spelled it right, I'm really dyslexic today. Okay, get Windows feature. There we go. All right, so this will give us a listing of roles and features. So if we had the GUI, do the same thing, right, as if you open Control Panel and you looked at programs and features in Windows 10 and add Windows features, or if you opened up Server Manager in 2016 or 2019 and looked at roles and features that way, right? So that's this command, get Windows feature, and I'm going to look for some specific services and roles to add that are prerequisites. So I'm going to pipe this and say where, or I could just use the shorthand method and use a question mark, either way, right? And I'm going to say name is like and RSAT, right? Because what I want to do, make sure I close the brackets here. What I want to do, remote server administration tools, role administration tools, and so forth. There's my RSAT tools, but I do not yet have the ability to run Active Directory commands on my core server. And that would be very useful, right? There's a lot of things when you're working with Exchange where you might want to list or grab a user account from AD. So you want to call get AD user or set AD user and set an attribute or something, and then pipe that over to a mailbox command like enable mailbox or something like that. So if we're going to do that, we need to enable the module for Active Directory on our Exchange 2019 core server, right? Because it's not there by default. So this is the module that we want, and the command to install it, install Windows feature, and what we want, name in this case, and it is RSAT-ADDS PowerShell. All right, so install Windows feature, name RSAT-ADDS PowerShell, and this is just going to get us the module to be able to, to run Active Directory commands on our core server. Now, it's important to remember who we're logged in as. All right, so I'm logged in under a local account in the setup process as far as joining the domain and everything. So I'm going to sign out. I need to sign in as a domain admin now. So I'm going to sign in as a Starbucks account. All right, and to do that, exit, sign out, and I'm going to choose escape here. And I want to select other user, and this time I'm going to say Starbucks, and all right. Okay, and give us some margin space here, and I'm going to launch PowerShell here. Now, I have installed. I've installed the modules necessary to access Active Directory, but I need to load them into memory. I have to import them. So I want to use the command import module, and then the name is straightforward, Active Directory, okay? All right, and now that I've done that, that will give me access to all those Active Directory commands, right? So remember, first we used the install Windows feature, and we installed RSAT-ADDS PowerShell. And I did that logged in as a local user. But before I call import module from PowerShell, I had to sign out, and I had to sign in as a domain user. In this case, somebody with domain admin privileges, or privileges to run commandlets in Active Directory. Now, if I wanted to, I could use Active Directory commandlets, and that's very useful. It's going to be very useful on an Exchange core server, because you often will call like get-AD-user or set-AD-user on an account to get attributes or user data, and then pipe it into enable mailbox or something in Exchange. And we can test that out. So we'll call get-AD-user, and we'll filter on a wildcard. We'll just grab everybody, but I don't want to get all that information, so I'm going to pipe it to select and then just choose name. Okay, and so notice this gives me all the user accounts I have in Active Directory. Okay, so now I have access to that. All right, so that's one prerequisite that we have set up even before we install Exchange. It's, we've concur, we've agreed that it would be good to have Active Directory access, so we installed that Windows feature. Okay, and in this case it was RSAT-ADDS PowerShell. There's another feature that we also might want to install. And remember where the command was? Get Windows feature. And that's like all those, roles and services and things that you would get. But in this case, we want to pipe it, and we're going to say where, or remember, as a shortcut, you can use a question mark. And we're going to say name. We'll use the like operator, and let's match it to, we're looking for server media foundation. So I'm just going to type in server media and wildcard it. See if we can get it to show up. Yeah. Oh, I didn't close my brace there. Bad. Say open, closing, and close my quote, and close my brace. Okay, well. All right. So anyway, this is what we want: server media foundation. Okay. So we're gonna do install Windows feature and name and server-media-foundation, and also, all right, Active Directory domain services. So RSAT, and go ahead and set that up. Get that set up as a prerequisite. There's just be one less thing we have to worry about when we go to install Exchange. Exchange is a huge application. Okay, it's Active Directory integrated, and it modifies the schema. It's just a monster. It's a beast of an application, and there are a lot of dependencies and a lot of prereqs that you have to take care of, before you can actually install the server itself. Okay, so I have that prereq installed as well. And I'm gonna open up my firewall. That should also for SQL later, if I decide we want to do something with SQL, or add port opening and TCP and 3306, and we could call it anything, but why not MySQL? Okay, so we just added that in for later. Okay, now we need to download some things. Gotta go download some things, and we want to copy them over to our server, and so we'll do that next. So to download things, there's really no functionality for that other than just basic Windows updates on a core server. So for things like that, we want to go to our management workstation, whether that's 2019 as a member server or a Windows 10 client. But in this case, I have a Windows 10 client, and I'm going to open up my web browser, and I want to get the latest version of POSH. And in this case, if I go here to GitHub, we can find the latest version of POSH 7.0.3. At least at this time. By the time you watch this video, who knows what it'll be, but just go to GitHub and find the latest, greatest version. Make sure you select the right one for your platform, because there are many. But in this case, I'm going to get the MSI version, and I'm using a 64-bit architecture on my server, so I'm going to choose this option, the PowerShell and the Windows x64 zip, or not zip, MSI. Let me just grab the MSI there. That'll be a little easier. All right, so downloading that. The other thing we want to get is the latest version of .NET, which at the time of this video is 4.8. And so I'm just going to go over here, to Microsoft and grab the latest .NET Framework runtime, which is 4.8. Okay. So everything's in that folder, okay? And I haven't set up Windows Admin Center on this workstation yet. If I did, there's actually a graphical tool we could use to remotely access the file system and upload files quite easily, just using a web interface. But that's okay, we don't have to have that, we have PowerShell. And so until we get Windows Admin Center set up, we're going to use PowerShell to copy those files over with. And first thing I would want to do in PowerShell to copy my files over, I want to create a new session. And so I'm going to do, I'll call it copy session. That's the variable name that I'll use. And let's copy session, new PS session, computer name, and what was our computer name? It was, what do we call it? Mail 2019 core-01, right? That's what it was. And then credential, and we can just use get credential parenthetically, okay? So it needs to be someone with permission to access our Exchange 2019 core server. So in this case, Starbuck, right? She's a domain admin. She can do that. She can get in there and do all that stuff. All right. So now I have that in that variable copy session right here. All right. So I now have a connection to my Exchange core server. And so now I can just use copy item. Copy item. And notice the autocomplete here, and notice I'm not typing it right, but downloads, and I'm going to choose the PowerShell first. All right, so I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to copy it to the root drive. There's a colon there. Where did I get the extra parenthesis quote from? Extra quote. All right, so I want to copy it to C:, and I'm going to use my variable copy session. Okay. No Windows Admin Center required. And I just want to do the same thing for the other file, which ICE is so awesome because it makes it so easy. I could just select it there. All right. So that takes care of PowerShell 7.0.3. Now I want to copy over .NET 4.8 runtime. Yeah, that's a small file, so this is pretty quick. Okay. So at this point, those files have been copied over. And, you know, whenever you open a remote session to something, you always want to close it. So I'm just going to call, not remote, remove PS session. And actually, let me show you that. I'll use the ID 1 there. All right, and if I call get PS session, all right, there. So let's go ahead and exit out of ICE and hop back over to our core server with those two files copied. Now we can set up the latest version of POSH and also the latest version of the .NET runtime. And now we're back on our Exchange 2019 core server. And I'm going to sign in as one of our domain admins, Starbuck, and go to the root directory where we uploaded those files and use dir. And now we can see here's the .NET package, and here's the PowerShell 7.03 package. To install, I just need to use the dot operator and a backslash. And Microsoft started copying Linux in that department, or in that way. Remember, if you guys are familiar with bourne shell scripting or installing packages in a Linux environment, you use like a dot and a slash. So dot / and PowerShell, and I could wildcard it, but -7.0.3-win-x64-MSI. Okay. And I'm going to choose to install it. I'll just go with the default program files, PowerShell. And I'm going to choose Enable-PSRemoting. So for my current version as well as this new version of POSH. Okay. And finish. All right, so that package is installed. And if I want to, I can get rid of it now. And it's PowerShell. Now that I've installed it, -7, then I can just wildcard the rest of that. Okay. All right, so that package is gone. Now let me show you something. PowerShell. Let me show you that I'm dyslexic and I can't type it. All right, so in PowerShell with that package installed, let me use this command, right? Which is PS version table. This will give us some of the version info about, right? So this is what was installed and built in with 2019. This isn't the actual PowerShell 7.0.3 that we installed. So if I'm at a command prompt on my core server and I type PowerShell, I just want you to bear in mind what I'm getting is the default PowerShell installation. Now, if I want to be able to access PowerShell 7, I want to exit out of my standard PowerShell. Right? Look where I am on my file system at the root level. So I want to cd to program files, okay? And then in program files, I want to go into PowerShell, this folder here. cd PowerShell, and notice that there's a directory 7, all right? So if I cd into 7 in that directory, and then what I want to do, I'm going to just wildcard this, and we'll look at any executables in this directory. But you see pwsh.exe. That's what I actually want to run. And remember, we have to do that with the dot operator and a backslash. So pwsh.exe. All right. So now I'm running PowerShell again, but if I do my PS version table, look at my version now. Now it's 703. And I don't have access to all those PowerShell commands that I typically have, but just, you can have more than one version of POSH or PowerShell set up on a server. And this way I could go back and forth between the 2019 standard default version of POSH, and if I wanted to use some of the newer commandlets available in POSH 7, I can also load up and use POSH 7. So I'm going to exit out of the shell and go back to the root and clear and list the directory. And now I'm going to install and upgrade .NET, okay? And that's, again, the dot operator and the backslash and ndp 48-web.exe. Now, an important note here, this has to be installed using the /q option or quiet mode. And I'm not exactly sure why it doesn't complete the installation process. If you don't use quiet mode, it's going to prompt you and give you all this graphical GUI feedback. And so I assume that's why it doesn't actually complete properly unless you use it with the /q option, the quiet mode option. That's my assumption. I don't know, I haven't Googled it, but I just noticed that if you don't use that option, it never seems to complete or actually get through the installation process. So if I put it in quiet mode, it's not going to prompt me, but on Core Server, that's a good thing, because Core Server doesn't really support a graphical user interface or a lot of the features that we've come to expect with a GUI, okay? So a lot of times you would want to do something in quiet mode on Server Core. And in this case, .NET 4.8, or framework runtime, it won't even complete installation if you don't use the /q option. So we're going to do that. We won't see anything, but when it's all done, it'll reboot, and then we'll have access to, we'll have access to our .NET. You know what? Before we do that, let me go back into PowerShell, and let me show you something about our current .NET framework. And I'm just going to use GCI here. And, all right, so it's 4.7. It's not 4.8. And this is just pulling the registry data. I'm using GCI and I'm pulling it from the registry data here. All right, so I just wanted to show you that. So again, let's do ndp48. And we'll use the quiet option with the dot operator and the backslash. All right. Basically, we just want to wait until our core server reboots, and we'll know that it's done. And when it reboots, we'll go back and we'll check the version again. Instead of 4.7, you'll see 4.8. Okay, and now that we have rebooted, we'll sign in again as our domain admin Starbuck. And I'm going to go into PowerShell. And remember last time it was 4.7. So if we get our version now, let's go ahead and get our version once again, and we'll pull out of the registry with GCI. All right, so now it's 4.8. So we're just verifying that that upgrade took place. Okay. As another prerequisite, we want to go ahead and install Internet Information Services and set up the web server functionality on our core server, because that's an integral part of Exchange, right? Exchange uses Internet Information Service for a lot of things. OA and the EAC and the ECP. So, just the ability to administer Exchange relies upon Internet Information Services. So we can install that from PowerShell as well. All right, so PowerShell. And we're going to do get Windows feature. And in this case, we're going to pipe it, and we want to match it to where use a like operator, and I'll just wildcard it here. Let me close my brace there. All right. Just to see what we want, but we want the Internet Information Services, or the web server role and its features and management tools. Okay. So these are the packages I can select from that have to do with web services and web management. And the particular ones I want, I'm going to go ahead and install Windows feature, and I want to do name web server, and I want to make sure I include the management tools. That'll be very helpful. Functionality is limited in core, but that will give us a few options. So go ahead and install that role and feature. Okay, and success. And let's just go ahead and look at our version of IIS. And if we, to do that, get item property, and we can check the registry, HK local machine, software, Microsoft, inet STP, and let's select setup string and version string. All right, so Internet Information Services 10, version 10.0. We're just verifying that. And let's hop over to our management workstation where we have a web browser. We'll just give it a quick test. So on our Windows 10 management workstation, quick way to test that. We haven't set up the binding for SSL over port 443 yet, so there's no certificate bound to give us a secure way to access the web server. So it's no HTTPS yet, just HTTP. But we should be able to use the host name of our server, right? So what was it? Mail 2019 core-01. Okay. And there it is. There's Internet Information Services. Okay. So we've tested it on our Windows 10 server. And if we had a graphical interface, we could use localhost. But we don't. This is core, so that's sort of a moot point. But that way we've just verified that IIS is now set up and functioning properly. Next, there's another prerequisite we need to download and install. And remember that, since it's a core server, we've got to download on our workstation. And then we can use PowerShell And later we'll use Windows Admin Center to copy files over. Just to show you that you don't have to have Windows Admin Center, that we can do everything with POSH if we want to, if we need to. We'll do it that way for now. So I'm going to open a web browser, and I need to go find the runtime, and I have the link, I believe, Microsoft. All right. And here's the Visual C++ Redistributable Packages for Visual Studio 2013. I know that, visually that seems a bit strange for Exchange Server 2019, but that's actually a prerequisite for installing Exchange Server. So we'll download it. And I need to choose the right one for my platform. Not too big, only 7 megabytes. And I'm going to download the 64-bit version. Okay. And in this case, just want to make sure. All right, so here it is, v redistributable x64.exe. All right, so I want to copy that over using PowerShell again, and I can just open PowerShell or ICE. I'm going to run it as administrator. And in this case, and do the same thing that we did before, just to copy that file over, okay? So, we'll call our variable copy session, and what we need to do is create a new PowerShell session. I'm missing my dash there. That's what I like about ICE is that autocomplete there. It's a lifesaver. And computer name. And in this case, mail 2019 core-01. It's the server we want to connect to. There's our core exchange server. And for credential, we can parenthetically just call get credential. So in other words, we call the method, the function get credential, and the results of that, a secure password string gets passed to the parameter credential. So that's the reason we have to wrap it in parentheses. Remember, that changes the precedence order when we make it parenthetical. So it's going to ask me for my password. It needs to be someone with domain admin privileges or privileges on our Exchange core server, in which case that's Starbuck. All right, so I type in her password. Okay, and now we have that variable. So now we can use that variable. We can use the PowerShell command copy item. This is very useful, when you need to copy things over to a core server. So copy item, and I'm going to choose downloads, and there's our VC redistributable underscore dot x64.exe. Yeah, so I'm going to copy that over, and I'm going to just copy it to the root. Again, we'll just make it easy. And to session, and I'm going to use the name of my string, which I declared above, right? Which was copy session. Okay, now that file has been copied over. And if I get my sessions, notice I have a connection. So I always want to close my connection out. All right, so I close my connection out, and then I can exit ICE. So now with that file copied over, let's hop over to our Exchange core server and install that prereq. So back on our core server, I'm going to exit out of PowerShell, and if I do a directory listing, there's a 2013 redistributable. And I don't need, since I've already upgraded, we've already completed the upgrade of our .NET framework, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of NDP48, and we'll wildcard it. Just, save space when you can. All right. And so again, remember, it's always dot operator, a backslash, and VC redistributable underscore X and 64.exe. And I'll agree to the terms and conditions and go ahead and install. Setup successful. That was relatively painless. And BCV, and we're done with that file. I'll wildcard it, so we'll get rid of it. All right. So now we've got rid of all the things we don't need anymore. Okay. And now we are almost ready to start the installation of Exchange, from the ISO or from, the DVD if you have it. But before we do that, why don't we go ahead and set up our new Exchange Core server in Windows Admin Center, and we'll go ahead and install Windows Admin Center on our management workstation client.